The kitchen smelled like burnt onions and broken dreams. Daniel Reed scraped the charred mess from his only good pan and wondered if running a restaurant on a colony world had been his worst idea yet. 3 years since he left the military. 3 years of trying to feed homesick farmers and miners who wanted food that tasted like earth instead of the synthetic protein blocks the supply ships brought. His restaurant occupied the ground floor of a prefab building that leaked when it rained. The sign outside read "The Hearth" in fading letters. 20 tables, half of them wobbly. A kitchen barely large enough for 2 people. But it was his, and most days that felt like enough. The door chimes rang. Daniel glanced up from his ruined pan and saw a figure standing in the doorway, wrapped in a cloak that seemed too heavy for the warm afternoon. The hood covered most of her face. "We're not open yet," Daniel called out. "Dinner service starts at 6. The figure didn't move. "I'm not here to eat." Her voice sounded young, nervous. Daniel set down the pan and wiped his hands on his apron. "Then what can I do for you?" She stepped inside, keeping the hood up. "I want to learn cooking. From you." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "I don't run a cooking school. This is a restaurant." "I know." She moved closer, and Daniel noticed her hands were hidden in the cloak's sleeves. "I'll work for free. Washing dishes, cleaning, whatever you need. Just teach me." He studied her carefully. Something felt off, but he couldn't place what. Maybe it was how she stood, too rigid, like someone pretending to be casual. Or maybe it was the desperation in her voice. "Why cooking?" Daniel asked. The hooded figure was quiet for a moment. "Because food can mean something. It's not just about surviving." That answer surprised him. Daniel pulled out a chair and sat down. "Take off the hood. If we're going to talk, I want to see who I'm talking to." Her hands trembled as they reached for the hood. She pulled it back slowly, revealing a face that made Daniel's breath catch. Her skin had a faint shimmer to it, like oil on water, and small ridges ran along her cheekbones. Her eyes were golden with vertical pupils. 2 small bumps protruded from her forehead, almost like the beginning of horns. "I'm Lyra," she said quietly. "And before you ask, yes, I'm different." Daniel had seen dozens of alien species during his military service. The galaxy was full of strange faces, but something about her seemed familiar in a way he couldn't explain. "What species? Does it matter?" She looked at the floor. "I just want to learn." He should have said no. He was barely keeping the restaurant running. Teaching someone from scratch would slow him down. But there was something in her eyes that reminded him of soldiers he'd known, people who needed purpose to keep going. "Can you follow instructions?" Daniel asked. Lyra nodded eagerly. "Can you show up on time and work hard?" Another nod. Daniel sighed and stood up. "Okay, we'll try for a week. But you do everything I say, exactly how I say it. Understand?" "Yes." The relief in her voice was obvious. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Daniel walked to the kitchen and gestured for her to follow. "First lesson starts now. Wash your hands." She approached the sink and pushed back her sleeves. Her forearms had the same shimmering quality as her face, with small scales catching the light. Daniel noticed, but said nothing. Everyone had their story. Lyra washed her hands thoroughly, scrubbing between her fingers like he showed her. When she finished, Daniel handed her a knife and a cutting board. "We're making soup," he said, pulling out vegetables from the cooling unit. "Simple, basic, the foundation of everything else." "Can you cut an onion?" "I've never tried." Daniel demonstrated, showing her how to hold the knife, how to make even cuts. Lyra watched with intense focus, her golden eyes tracking every movement. When he handed her the knife, she gripped it awkwardly. "Relax your hand," Daniel said. "The knife does the work, not your muscles." She tried again, and the cut was uneven but acceptable. As she worked, Daniel noticed the cutting board started to darken slightly where her hands rested. Not burning exactly, but getting warm. "You run hot?" he asked casually. Lyra froze. "Is that a problem?" "Might be useful around the stove." Daniel pulled out a pot. "Keep cutting. We need 3 onions." They worked in silence for a while. Lyra's cuts improved slowly. She made mistakes, had to restart twice, but she never complained. Daniel found himself explaining not just the how, but the why. Talking about how different vegetables release different flavors when cooked, how patience mattered more than speed. "In the military, I cooked for hundreds of people, Daniel said as he showed her how to heat oil in the pot. They were tired, scared, far from home. A good meal was sometimes the only normal thing in their day. Lyra added the onions to the pot like he demonstrated. The sizzle made her jump back. "It's just steam," Daniel said. "Watch how they change color. When they turn clear, that's when they're ready." She leaned closer, studying the transformation. "It's like magic. It's chemistry. But yeah, sometimes it feels like magic." He handed her a wooden spoon. "Stir gently. Don't let them stick." As Lyra stirred, her hood fell back completely. Daniel saw the small horns more clearly now, maybe 3 inches tall, curved slightly backward. She didn't seem to notice or care anymore. They spent the next hour building the soup layer by layer. Vegetables, broth, herbs, each addition explained and demonstrated. Lyra absorbed every word, asked questions that showed she was thinking ahead. When the soup was finally done, Daniel ladled some into 2 bowls. He handed one to Lyra. "First rule of cooking," he said, "always taste what you make." She sipped carefully, her eyes widening. For a moment, she just held the spoon, staring into the bowl. Then tears started running down her cheeks. "Is something wrong?" Daniel asked. "No." Lyra wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "It's perfect. I made something perfect." Daniel smiled. "You made something good. Perfect comes later with practice." But as he watched her take another sip, carefully, like the soup was precious, Daniel realized he'd just taken on more than a student. He'd taken on someone who needed this, who needed to create something meaningful in a galaxy that probably hadn't been kind to her. "Same time tomorrow?" Lyra asked hopefully. Daniel nodded. "Same time. And Lyra, bring comfortable clothes. That cloak will catch fire around the stove." She smiled for the first time, and despite the scales and horns and golden eyes, it was completely genuine. "I will," she promised. "Thank you, Daniel." After she left, Daniel stood in his kitchen, looking at the empty soup bowl she'd washed and dried and placed carefully on the counter. Whatever her story was, whatever had brought her to his restaurant, he suspected teaching her would change both their lives. He just didn't know how much. 5 weeks passed like pages turning in a book Daniel hadn't known he was writing. Lyra showed up every morning at 7, wearing simple work clothes that covered most of her scales but left her arms free. She attacked each lesson with focus that bordered on obsession, taking notes in a small leather journal she kept in her pocket. The breakfast rush had just ended when Lyra dropped an entire tray of plates. The crash echoed through the restaurant. She stood frozen, staring at the broken pieces scattered across the floor. "It's okay," Daniel said, grabbing a broom. "Happens to everyone. I'm sorry. I wasn't paying attention." She knelt down to pick up the larger pieces, and Daniel noticed her hands were shaking. "What's wrong?" He crouched beside her. Lyra sat back on her heels. "I got a message from my family last night. They want me to come home. Do you want to go?" "No." The word came out fierce. "But they don't understand. They think this is just a phase, something I'll grow out of." Daniel swept the broken plates into a pile. "Tell me about them." They moved to the kitchen, and while Lyra chopped vegetables for lunch prep, she talked. Her family lived in what she called a palace, though she didn't specify where. Everything was formal, structured, planned down to the minute. Meals were delivered on precise schedules, nutritionally balanced but tasteless. "We had servants who cooked," Lyra said, her knife moving steadily through a carrot. "But the food was just fuel. No one cared what it tasted like." "Sounds lonely," Daniel said. "It was." She paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. "One night, I couldn't sleep, so I wandered down to the kitchens. I saw one of the servants making bread. She was singing while she kneaded the dough, and when she put it in the oven, she smiled. I asked her why, and she said making bread made her happy." Daniel checked the stock pot simmering on the stove. "What did you do?" "I sat with her while the bread baked. She gave me a piece when it was done, still warm, with butter melting into it." Lyra's voice went soft. "It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. Not because of the ingredients, but because someone made it with care. That's when you decided to run away." "Not right away, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. How something simple could mean so much." She finished the carrot and reached for a bell pepper. "My family wouldn't understand. They think cooking is beneath us." Daniel stirred the stock. "Nothing that brings people together is beneath anyone. They worked in comfortable silence after that, falling into the rhythm they'd developed over the past weeks. Lyra had grown confident with the basics. Her knife skills had improved dramatically, and she could manage 3 dishes at once without panicking that a customer came in, an older man named Victor who worked at the water treatment plant. He ordered the soup special and sat at his usual table by the window. "Let Lyra make it," Daniel said quietly. Her eyes went wide. "By myself. You know the recipe. You've made it a dozen times." Lyra took a deep breath and nodded. Daniel watched as she gathered ingredients, her movements deliberate but sure. She heated the pot, added oil, started with the aromatics exactly like he'd taught her. Every step was careful, thoughtful. 20 minutes later, she carried the bowl to Victor's table herself. Daniel watched from the kitchen doorway as the old man took his first spoonful. Victor's expression changed, softening in a way Daniel had seen before. The man ate slowly, savoring each bite. When Victor finished, he called Lyra over. That was exceptional. Different from Daniel's usual, but just as good. Maybe better. Lyra looked back at Daniel, who gave her a thumbs up. She returned to the kitchen with tears in her eyes again, though this time she was smiling. "He liked it," she whispered. "He loved it," Daniel corrected. "Because you made it for him, not just for yourself." The afternoon prep went smoothly. Lyra was chopping herbs when she asked, "Do you have family, Daniel?" He'd been expecting this question eventually. "Not anymore. My parents died when I was young, raised by my grandmother until she passed. No siblings, no wife, no kids. That's why you have this place," Lyra said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, the restaurant is my family now. The regulars, the staff, even the difficult customers. They all matter." Lyra's knife stopped moving. "I wish my family understood that. That finding your own purpose isn't betrayal. Maybe they're scared," Daniel suggested. "Change is frightening, especially when someone you care about chooses a different path." "They're not scared." Lyra's voice had an edge Daniel hadn't heard before. "They're disappointed." Before Daniel could respond, the kitchen door swung open. "Is prep cook?" A young woman named Rita stuck her head in. "Daniel, there's someone outside asking about Lyra." Lyra went very still. Daniel saw fear flash across her face. "What do they look like?" Rita shrieked. "Big guy, fancy clothes, doesn't look friendly." Daniel moved to the window and peered out. A man stood near the entrance, tall and broad, wearing what looked like formal robes made from material that shimmered in the sunlight. His face was stern, and he scanned the street with the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. "Is that your family?" Daniel asked. Lyra looked out, and her shoulders sagged. "That's one of my father's advisors. They found me. Do you want to talk to him?" "I don't have a choice." She untied her apron with shaking hands. "If I don't, they'll just send more people." Daniel grabbed her shoulder gently. "Hey, you always have a choice. If you want to stay in the kitchen, I'll tell him you're not here." Lyra met his eyes, and Daniel saw gratitude there mixed with resignation. "No, I should face this. But thank you." She walked to the door, and Daniel followed at a distance. The advisor's expression didn't change when he saw Lyra, but his voice carried clear disapproval. "Your father requests your immediate return. Tell him I'm not finished learning," Lyra said. "This is not a request." The advisor's tone made it clear he expected instant obedience. Daniel stepped forward. "She's my employee. If someone wants her back, they can ask her themselves, not send messengers." The advisor looked at Daniel like he was an insect. "Human, you don't understand who you're dealing with." "Maybe not," Daniel said, "but I understand respect, and you're not showing any." For a moment, the advisor seemed ready to argue. Then his eyes narrowed. "Very well. I will inform Lord Drakmer that his daughter refuses to return and has taken employment with a human. I'm sure he'll find that very interesting." The advisor left, and Lyra stood trembling. "Daniel, I need to tell you something about who my father actually is." Daniel guided her back inside. "Let's make some tea first. Then we'll talk." As they sat in the quiet kitchen with steaming cups between them, Daniel suspected his life was about to get much more complicated. But looking at Lyra's frightened face, he knew he'd stand by his decision. Sometimes teaching meant protecting your students, even from their own families. "Okay," he said gently. Tell me everything. Lyra's tea had gone cold by the time she finished explaining. Daniel sat across from her, trying to process what he'd just heard. So you're a dragon, he said slowly. And your father rules 17 star systems. The Crimson Dominion, yes. Lyra wouldn't meet his eyes. I should have told you from the beginning. Daniel rubbed his face. During his military service, he'd heard stories about the dragon territories. Fleets so massive they blocked out stars. Diplomats who negotiated with trembling hands. Treaties signed in fear rather than friendship. And he'd been teaching the princess how to make soup. Why cooking? He asked. Of all the things you could have learned, why this? Lyra finally looked up. Because it's the one thing in my life that felt real. Everything else was about power, control, maintaining image. But when I watched that servant make bread, she was creating something that mattered to her. Not because anyone ordered it, but because she wanted to. And your father doesn't approve. He thinks I've embarrassed the family. Dragons don't cook. We conquer, we rule, we expand territory. We don't make food with our own hands. Her voice turned bitter. That's for lesser species. Daniel felt a flash of anger, but pushed it down. Getting mad wouldn't help. What happens if you go back? I'll be prepared for the succession trials. Lessons in war strategy, fleet command, political manipulation. They'll assign me a territory to govern, and I'll spend the next 1,000 years maintaining control. She slumped in her chair. I'll become exactly like my father. Cold, distant, seeing every interaction as a power calculation. That's a long time to be miserable. Dragons live a very long time. Lyra traced patterns on the table with one finger, which makes choosing the wrong path even more terrifying. They sat in silence. Outside, New Haven's single sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. Daniel thought about his own choices, leaving the military, starting the restaurant, building something small but meaningful. I have an idea, he said, but you're not going to like it. Lyra leaned forward. What? Go back. Face your father. But take something with you. I don't understand. Daniel stood and started pulling ingredients from storage. You're going to prepare a meal. A real meal, with everything you've learned. And you're going to serve it to your father yourself. He won't eat it. He'll see it as an insult. Maybe. Or maybe he'll see what you've accomplished. Daniel set flour, eggs, butter on the counter. You told me dragons used to be different before the expansion, before they became conquerors. Maybe your father needs to remember that. Lyra stared at the ingredients. What if it doesn't work? Then you'll know you tried. And you can make your next decision with no regrets. He handed her an apron. But we're going to make this meal perfect. Everything you know, everything you can do, all in one dinner. They spend the next 3 days planning. Lyra wanted to incorporate both human and dragon culinary traditions, which proved difficult since dragon cuisine focused entirely on efficiency rather than flavor. But she remembered dishes from her childhood, rare moments when the kitchen servants had experimented. There was a spiced meat dish, she said, flipping through her notes, served during the founding festivals. I haven't tasted it in 100 years. Daniel helped her recreate it from memory, adjusting human spices to match her descriptions. They tested each course multiple times, refining flavors, perfecting timing. Rita and the other staff watched with curiosity, but asked no questions. That on the third evening, Lyra's communication device chimed. She read the message and went pale. He's coming here. Tomorrow. Your father. Yes. He says if I won't return, he'll collect me himself. Her hand shook. Daniel, you don't understand. When my father travels, he brings warships. This entire colony could be seen as hostile. Daniel grabbed his own communicator and called the colonial governor. The conversation was brief and tense. Yes, dragon ships had been detected. Yes, the colony was preparing for possible evacuation. No, they had no idea why the Crimson Lord was coming to their backwater planet. I'll tell them, Daniel said to Lyra. Explain this is personal, not political. Will they believe you? They'll have to. He squeezed her shoulder. We're finishing this meal tonight. Tomorrow, you're going to show your father what you've become. They worked through the night. 6 courses, each one representing a lesson. The soup from her first day. The roasted vegetables she'd finally mastered after dozens of attempts. The bread she'd learned to make with patience rather than speed. a fish course that demonstrated precision, the spiced meat from her memories, and finally, a dessert that combined human chocolate with a dragon fruit that only grew in the Crimson Dominion. Dawn arrived too quickly. Daniel helped Lyra pack the prepared components into cooling containers. She'd changed into formal clothes, though she kept her kitchen apron folded in her bag. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Good," Daniel said. "It means this matters to you." The sky darkened at noon. 3 ships descended through the atmosphere, each one large enough to carry thousands. They didn't land, but hovered over the colony, casting shadows across the streets. Citizens stopped and stared upward in fear at a smaller craft detached from the lead ship and descended to the plaza in front of the hearth. The landing ramp extended, and guards emerged first. They were dragons too, smaller than Lyra but still imposing, wearing armor that gleamed like blood. Then he appeared. Lord Drakmer was enormous, easily 12 feet tall, his scales the deep red of burning coals. His eyes swept across the plaza with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been challenged. Those eyes found the restaurant, then Lyra standing in the doorway, and narrowed. "Daughter," his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "This foolishness ends now." Lyra stepped forward, and Daniel saw her straighten her spine. "Father, before we discuss my return, I ask one thing." "You ask." Drakmer's tone suggested the concept was foreign. "Have dinner with me. 1 meal. That's all I request." The Dragon Lord stared at his daughter for a long moment. His guard shifted, uncertain. Finally, he gestured dismissively. "Very well. 1 meal. Then you return home and accept your responsibilities." Lyra bowed slightly. "Thank you, father." As Drakmer approached the restaurant, Daniel wondered if teaching a dragon princess to cook had been his bravest decision or his most foolish. The massive dragon had a duck to fit through the doorway, and his presence filled the small dining room completely. "Shall we begin?" Lyra asked, her voice steady despite her fear. Daniel caught her eye and nodded encouragement. Whatever happened next would determine not just Lyra's future, but possibly the fate of their entire colony. Time to find out if food could bridge the gap between worlds. Lord Drakmer filled the restaurant like a storm contained in 4 walls. He sat at the largest table, which still seemed too small for his frame. His guards positioned themselves at the exits, hands resting on weapons that probably could level the building. Daniel had cleared the restaurant of other customers. Now it was just him, Lyra, the Dragon Lord, and the weight of 17 star systems watching through those ancient eyes. "You will serve me food," Drakmer said, his tone making it clear what he thought of the idea. "Like a common servant. I will serve you a meal I prepared myself," Lyra corrected, surprising Daniel with her firmness. "There's a difference. Enlighten me." The sarcasm was thick enough to cut. Lyra disappeared into the kitchen. Daniel started to follow, but Drakmer's voice stopped him. "Human, you are the one teaching my daughter this nonsense." Daniel turned. "I'm teaching her to cook, yes. Why would you waste her potential on such trivial skills?" Drakmer leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "Do you understand what she is? What she could become?" "I understand. She's someone who wanted to learn something meaningful to her." Daniel met the dragon's gaze without flinching. "That's enough for me." Drakmer studied him with eyes that had probably sentenced worlds to destruction. "You're either very brave or very stupid." "I've been called both," Daniel admitted, usually on the same day. A sound that might have been laughter rumbled from Drakmer's chest. "At least you're honest. Most humans grovel or flee when meeting me. I spent 10 years cooking for soldiers in war zones. I've seen scary. You're just bigger." This time Drakmer definitely laughed, though it held no warmth. "I see why my daughter finds you interesting. You treat her as an equal. She's my equal. Better than me at some things already." Lyra emerged carrying the first course. A simple soup in a white bowl, steam rising in delicate spirals. She placed it in front of her father with steady hands. "Vegetable soup," Drakmer observed flatly. "How creative." "Taste it first," Lyra said. "Then judge." The Dragon Lord picked up the spoon, which looked tiny in his clawed hand. He sipped, his expression unchanging. Swallowed. "Set the spoon down. It's adequate." Lyra's shoulders tensed, but she nodded and returned to the kitchen. Daniel followed her this time. He hated it, she whispered. He said adequate. From him, that might be high praise. Daniel checked the oven. Keep going. We planned 6 courses for a reason. The second course was roasted vegetables with herbs. Drachmer ate mechanically, offering no comment. The third was the bread, warm and fresh. He tore a piece, examined it, ate it without expression. Daniel watched the Dragon Lord carefully. Something was shifting in those ancient eyes, though the face remained carved from stone. Drachmer wasn't just eating. He was remembering something. The fourth course arrived. Pan-seared fish with a citrus glaze. Lyra had spent hours perfecting this dish, learning to crisp the skin while keeping the inside tender. Drachmer cut into it, raised the fork to his mouth. He stopped. The pause lasted only a second, but Daniel caught it. Some memory had surfaced, something the taste or smell triggered. Drachmer ate the fish slowly, and for the first time, he seemed to actually taste it. This preparation, he said quietly. Where did you learn it? Daniel taught me the technique, Lyra answered. But the glaze is traditional, from the founding era. Drachmer set down his fork. I haven't tasted that glaze in 3,000 years. Mother used to make it, Lyra said softly. Before she died, I found the recipe in the palace archives. The silence that followed was different, heavier. Drachmer stared at his plate like it held answers to questions he'd stopped asking long ago. Lyra brought the 5th course. The spiced meat from dragon tradition, recreated from her childhood memories. Drachmer looked at it for a long moment before eating. His jaw tightened. You remembered, he said, the festival dish. You'd serve it yourself before the expansion, when there were celebrations instead of just ceremonies. Lyra sat down across from him, something Daniel suspected she'd never done before. You used to smile then. I saw images in the historical records. That was a different time. A different dragon. Drachmer's voice had lost its edge. We were weaker then. Were we? Lyra challenged. Or were we just different? Drachmer didn't answer. He finished the meat in silence, and Daniel noticed the Dragon Lord's hands weren't quite steady anymore. The final course was the dessert. Lyra placed it in front of her father with careful reverence. The combination of human chocolate and dragon fruit created something new, something that belonged to both worlds. Drachmer took a bite. Closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. Your mother made something like this, he whispered. For your hatching day, I told her it was impractical, that we had servants for such tasks. His voice cracked slightly. She made it anyway, said some things were too important to delegate. Lyra reached across the table. Her hand stopped inches from her father's. When did we lose that? When did we forget that creating something with your own hands matters? Drachmer looked at his daughter's hand, then at her face. For the first time since arriving, he seemed to really see her. Not as a disappointment or a wayward child, but as a person who'd found something he'd lost millennia ago. We conquered 17 systems, he said slowly. Built an empire that spans light years. Commanded fleets that make other species tremble. And somewhere in all that power, we forgot why we were building it. It was supposed to protect what we loved, Lyra said. But we can't protect what we've forgotten how to value. Drachmer stood abruptly. His guards tensed, but he waved them off. He looked at Daniel, then at the kitchen, then back at his daughter. This human taught you all of this. He taught me that creating something meaningful is never beneath anyone, Lyra answered. That the smallest act done with care can matter more than the grandest conquest done without thought. The Dragon Lord was quiet for a long time. Outside, the warships still hung in the sky, waiting for his command. Inside this small restaurant, a father struggled with a decision that would change everything. I came here to bring you home, Drachmer finally said, to force you back to your duties. Lyra lifted her chin. And now, Drachmer looked at the empty plates in front of him. 6 courses, 6 lessons, 6 memories of who he used to be before power consumed everything else. Now, he said slowly, I have a different proposition. Lord Drachmer stood at the window, looking out at his warships. Daniel could see the calculation happening behind those ancient eyes, the weight of millennia shifting into new configurations. I built the Crimson Dominion through strength, Drakmer said, not turning around. Conquered systems, absorbed civilizations, created an empire that would last forever. But empires need more than strength. They need purpose. Lyra stayed seated, watching her father carefully. What are you saying? I'm saying we forgot our purpose somewhere in the conquest. We became so focused on expansion that we lost sight of why we were expanding. He turned to face them. We became weapons instead of people. Daniel leaned against the counter. It's not too late to remember. Drakmer's laugh was bitter. You don't understand. The Dominion has billions of dragons. All of them raised in the same system, believing the same things. How do you change an entire civilization? One person at a time, Daniel said. Same way you teach anything. The dragon lord stared at him. You think teaching cooking will transform my empire? No, but teaching dragons that creating something matters as much as conquering something, that might. Silence filled the restaurant. Outside, colonists had gathered at a safe distance, watching the drama unfold. Daniel spotted the governor among them, probably planning evacuation routes. I have a proposal, Drakmer said finally. For both of you. Lyra straightened. What kind of proposal? The Dominion has cultural advisors for a dozen species, military strategists, economic planners, but we have no one teaching us how to be more than conquerors. He looked directly at Daniel. I want you to fill that role. Daniel blinked. Me? You taught my daughter something I couldn't. Something I didn't even know she needed to learn. The Dominion needs that perspective. I'm just a cook. I run a small restaurant on a colony world. Exactly. Drakmer gestured around the restaurant. You build something meaningful without armies or fleets. You create connections through simple acts. That's what we've lost. Lyra stood up quickly. Father, you can't just take Daniel from his home. I'm not taking anyone. I'm offering an opportunity. Drakmer focused on Daniel again. Come to the Crimson Dominion. Set up a school. Teach dragons what you taught Lyra. Show them that strength comes in many forms. Daniel's mind raced. Leave New Haven? Leave his restaurant? Everything he'd built over 3 years. What exactly would I be teaching? He asked. Whatever you think they need to learn. Cooking, yes, but also the philosophy behind it. How to create rather than just consume. How to find meaning in small acts. Drakmer's expression softened slightly. How to remember we're people, not just weapons. And if I say no, then you say no. I won't force you. Drakmer glanced at Lyra. I've learned recently that forcing people down paths they don't want leads nowhere good. Lyra looked at Daniel with something like hope in her eyes. She didn't speak, but he could read the question there. Would he come with her? Would he help her change a civilization that had forgotten how to care about anything beyond power? Daniel thought about the soldiers he'd cooked for. Young people sent to fight wars they barely understood, finding comfort in meals that reminded them of home. He'd fed their bodies, but more importantly, he'd fed their humanity in places designed to strip it away. Maybe the Dominion needed the same thing. I have conditions, Daniel said. Drakmer raised an eyebrow. You negotiate with me? You're asking me to leave my life behind. Yeah, I negotiate. Daniel crossed his arms. First, I don't work in a palace kitchen. I work in a real school where students can get their hands dirty. Acceptable. Second, Lyra isn't my assistant. She's my partner. Equal authority, equal respect. Drakmer looked at his daughter, who seemed stunned by the declaration. Agreed. Third, I teach who I want how I want. No political interference. No requirements about who deserves to learn. That could be problematic, Drakmer said slowly. That's the point. If you want to change your culture, you can't control how it changes. You have to trust the process. The Dragon Lord considered this. Daniel could see the struggle. Giving up control went against every instinct Drakmer had developed over thousands of years of ruling. Very well, Drakmer said finally. But I reserve the right to observe. Observe all you want. Just don't interfere. They shook hands, Daniel's small human hand disappearing into Drakmer's massive clawed grip. The dragon's skin was hot, like touching metal left in the sun. When do we leave? Daniel asked. 2 days. That gives you time to arrange your affairs here. Drakmer moved toward the door, his guards falling into formation. He paused at the threshold. Human, what's your full name? Daniel Reed. Daniel Reed, you're either going to change the Dominion or fail spectacularly. I'm not certain which, but I find myself interested in the outcome. Drakmer glanced at Lyra. Your daughter chose well, seeking you out. After he left, the restaurant felt empty despite Lyra and Daniel still being there. Through the window, they watched the Dragon Lord's shuttle rise toward the waiting warships. You don't have to do this, Lyra said quietly. It's a huge risk. Teaching always is, Daniel replied. But you took a risk walking into my restaurant 5 weeks ago. Seems fair I return the favor. The Dominion isn't like New Haven. It's vast, complicated, full of politics and power struggles. Then I'll need a good partner to help me navigate it. Daniel smiled at her. Think you're up for the job? Lyra smiled back, genuine and warm. I think we might actually change things. Or fail spectacularly. Your father seemed to think both options were interesting. They spent the rest of the day cleaning the kitchen and planning. Daniel would transfer ownership of the hearth to Rita, who'd been asking about buying it anyway. The regulars would be told he was taking a teaching position off-world. No need to mention where or who he'd be teaching. That night, Daniel stood in his empty restaurant one last time. He built something good here, something meaningful. Now he was leaving it behind to try building something even bigger. He thought about the soldiers he'd fed, the colonists he'd served, and the dragon princess who'd walked through his door looking for purpose. Teaching had always been about more than just the skills. It was about showing people they were capable of more than they thought, that if he could teach a civilization of conquerors to be people again, that would be worth the risk. 2 days later, Daniel Reed left New Haven aboard a dragon warship, carrying nothing but a bag of kitchen tools and the hope that food could bridge even the widest gaps between worlds. The Crimson Dominion capital made New Haven look like a sandcastle next to a mountain. Towers of crystalline metal stretched into a purple sky, and ships moved between them like schools of fish. The population of this single city exceeded that of 100 human colonies. Daniel stood on a platform overlooking the sprawl, feeling very small and very human. Overwhelming. Lyra asked beside him. That's one word for it. Daniel adjusted the bag on his shoulder. Where's this school we're supposed to set up? My father allocated a building in the education district. It used to be a strategy academy. She pointed to a structure that looked like it could house 1,000 students. We can modify it however we need. They spent the next week transforming military classrooms into cooking spaces. Daniel insisted on real kitchens, not sterile preparation rooms. He wanted warmth, life, the smell of food, and the sound of conversation. Slowly, the cold academy began to feel like a place where learning could happen. News spread quickly. The Crimson Lord's daughter was teaching cooking with a human. The reaction was mixed. Some dragons saw it as amusing, a harmless hobby for the princess. Others viewed it as embarrassing, beneath the dignity of their species. A few seemed genuinely curious. On opening day, Daniel expected maybe a dozen students. 50 showed up. They filled the largest kitchen, young dragons in various colors, all looking uncomfortable and uncertain. Most had never cooked anything in their lives. Food appeared when they wanted it, prepared by servants or synthesized by machines. Daniel stood at the front, Lyra beside him. He looked at the sea of scaled faces and felt that old familiar sensation from teaching soldiers. Nervous anticipation mixed with purpose. I'm Daniel Reed, he said simply. I'm a cook, not a chef with fancy titles, not a military strategist, just someone who makes food. And for the next few months, I'm going to teach you to do the same. A dragon in the back raised a hand. Why do we need to learn this? We have servants. Because making something with your own hands changes you, Daniel replied. It teaches patience, creativity, the value of care and attention. Plus, food you make yourself tastes better than anything someone else can give you. Another dragon, smaller than the others, asked, What's the point? We're being trained to lead fleets and govern systems. How does cooking help with that? Daniel smiled. Let me tell you about feeding soldiers. I spent 10 years cooking in war zones. Those soldiers could have eaten ration packs. Faster, easier, more efficient. But I made real food instead. Know why? The students waited, because it reminded them they were people, not just weapons. It gave them something to look forward to, something normal in abnormal situations. It kept them connected to why they were fighting. Daniel walked among the students. Your civilization is powerful. You have fleets, territory, strength. But what are you protecting? What makes all that power worth having? Silence. The students exchanged glances, clearly never having considered the question. That's what cooking teaches, Lyra added. Connection, purpose, the difference between existing and living. Daniel moved to his demonstration station. Today we're making bread. Simple, basic, thousands of years old. Every culture has some version of it. He showed them the ingredients. Flour, water, yeast, salt. Nothing complex or expensive. The students watched skeptically as he mixed and kneaded, explaining each step. Bread takes time, Daniel said. You can't rush it. The dough needs to rise, develop flavor, transform. That's the first lesson. Some things can't be forced or hurried. They need patience. The students paired up and tried it themselves. Their first attempts were disasters. Dough too wet or too dry. Kneading too aggressive or too gentle. But Daniel moved among them, correcting, encouraging, showing them how to feel when it was right. That a large male dragon named Torvin growled in frustration. This is impossible. The dough won't cooperate. Because you're fighting it, Daniel said. Work with it, not against it. Feel how it responds. Torvin tried again, gentler this time. Slowly, the dough began to come together. His expression shifted from frustration to concentration to something like wonder. It's changing, he said. That's chemistry. And a little bit of magic. Daniel smiled. Keep going. Hours later, the kitchen filled with the smell of baking bread. The students pulled their loaves from the ovens, most of them imperfect but real. They'd created something. Daniel had them taste their own work. The reactions were everything he'd hoped for. Some were surprised, others delighted, a few even emotional. They'd never tasted food they'd made themselves. This is just the beginning, Daniel said as class ended. Next week, we build on this. But remember how this feels. You did this. Not servants, not machines. You. The students filed out, talking among themselves. Some carried their bread carefully, like it was precious. Daniel noticed several were already planning to come back. Lyra helped him clean up. That went better than I expected. They're curious. That's all we need. Daniel wiped down a counter. Curiosity leads to interest. Interest leads to understanding. Over the following months, word spread. More students came, some from influential families, others from lower ranks. Daniel treated them all the same, teaching the philosophy along with the technique. Food as connection, cooking as creation, the value of care and attention. Lord Drakmer visited occasionally, observing from the back. He never interfered, but Daniel caught him watching the students with an expression that might have been hope point one evening. As Daniel and Lyra prepared for the next day's class, Drakmer appeared in the doorway. The High Council is concerned, he said without preamble. They believe you're teaching dangerous ideas. I'm teaching cooking, Daniel replied. You're teaching dragons to value creation over conquest, to find meaning in small acts, to question whether power alone is enough. Drakmer's expression was unreadable. They're right to be concerned. You are dangerous. Daniel set down the knife he'd been sharpening. Should I be worried? No. Drakmer's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. I told them the Dominion needs dangerous ideas. We've been stagnant for millennia, repeating the same patterns. You're introducing change. Is that good or bad? Ask me in 100 years. Drakmer looked around the kitchen. But I will say this. I've seen more genuine emotion in my daughter these past months than in the previous century. That alone makes this experiment worthwhile. After he left, Lyra turned to Daniel. You know he's never wrong about the long view. If he thinks this will change the Dominion, it will. Daniel thought about the students, the way their faces lit up when they created something good. The conversations about purpose and meaning that happened naturally while chopping vegetables or waiting for bread to rise. We're not changing the Dominion, he said. They're changing themselves. We're just showing them it's possible. Months became years. The school grew. Students who graduated started their own kitchens, teaching others. The idea spread like fire through dry grass. Not just cooking, but the philosophy behind it. Creating rather than consuming. Finding meaning in small acts. Connecting with others through shared experience. The Crimson Dominion didn't transform overnight. Empires never do. But slowly, steadily, dragons began remembering what they'd forgotten. That strength wasn't just in fleets and territory. That power meant nothing without purpose. And in a kitchen at the heart of the capital, a human cook and a dragon princess taught their students the most important lesson of all: how to be people again, one meal at a time. Daniel Reed never conquered anything. He never commanded fleets or governed systems. But he changed a civilization by showing them that the smallest acts, done with care, could matter more than the grandest conquests done without thought. Sometimes the greatest revolutions start in a kitchen.